Welcome and thank you for joining me for another installment in my Story Behind series, the series where I tell you the real-life events that inspired some of the most famous and iconic films and characters. Today I'm going to talk to you about the story behind Child's Play, and where this story leads may surprise you. Child's Play is a 1988 American horror film directed by Tom Holland with a screenplay by Don Mancini, John Lafayette, and Tom Holland from a story by Don Mancini. It follows a widowed mother who gives a doll to her son, unaware that the doll is possessed by the soul of a serial killer. Gaining a cult following, the film spawned 7 sequels, 2 short films, a video game, and a TV series yet to be released. But what inspired this film and franchise? Around the turn of the 20th century, a toy factory named the Steiff Company, founded in Germany, created a handmade doll stuffed with wood and wool that would stand at 40 inches. This doll would be gifted in the years between 1903 and 1906 to a young boy named Robert Eugene Otto. Robert Eugene Otto was born in 1900 to affluent parents, his father Thomas and his mother Minnie, and was the youngest of 4 children. It's uncertain who gifted the boy his new favourite toy. Some say it was a gift from his grandfather, others say it was a gift from his family's maid, who practiced voodoo and sought revenge for the abuse she suffered at the hands of her employers. Through my research, I cannot confirm which story is true. The doll was dressed in a sailor's outfit, something Robert himself used to wear, turning the doll into a disturbing mini Robert. This may seem creepy for some, but young Robert adored his new doll, so much that he gave the doll his name. His new doll and best friend would from here on go by Robert, while Robert would go by Gene, short for his middle name, Eugene. Gene formed a rather unhealthy attachment to Robert, taking him everywhere he went, refusing to not have him at his side. When Gene was naughty, as so many children are, he would shift blame to Robert, always pointing to his doll saying, "I didn't do it, Robert did." For a child, this is relatively normal behaviour. His attachment towards Robert would only grow, to the point he gifted the doll a stuffed animal so Robert would have his own toy companion. When odd occurrences would happen at home, such as moved furniture, fingers pointed at Gene, but Gene's finger always pointed to Robert. Gene would even have many endless conversations with his companion, which at first was not unusual, but when Robert began to answer back was when Mr. and Mrs. Otto became concerned. People reported often hearing 2 distinct voices coming from Gene's room, one clearly Gene's, but the other a deeper, unrecognizable voice. Sometimes loud, violent sounds could be heard emanating from Gene's bedroom, often at night. Those who entered would find the room in a state of disarray. Furniture overturned, toys turned to pieces, and a frightened Gene huddled in his bed, telling any who would hear that Robert did it. Despite the fear that young Gene was experiencing, the bond, or more accurately the hold Robert had over him, proved unyielding. There are claims that Gene's parents would hear the most horrific cries from their son's room, but when they got there, all that was to be found was a faithful Robert at their son's side. Neighbours would allegedly begin to report that when the family was not home, they could see the doll moving about the house on its own, moving from window to window. Some claimed to even hear the doll giggling around the house with the eeriest sound. Some would even claim to see the doll blink or make various other facial expressions. As activity in the home increased, the belief this doll had a mind of its own became more plausible, to the point Gene's aunt, who was said to be living in the house, encouraged the family to lock Robert in the attic. It's also alleged the aunt died in her sleep that same night, and fearing Robert was the cause, released him from the attic in hopes this action would appease the doll. Eventually, Gene would move out and pursue a career in art and become quite well known. He would even find the love of a good woman named Annette or Anne and get married. When his parents died, he inherited their home and moved in with his wife, where he was quickly reunited with Robert and began to rekindle their friendship. Gene once again kept Robert at his side at all times. His wife Annette grew an instant disdain for the doll and attempted to banish it to the attic. Instead, Gene gave Robert his own room, specifically the turret room. It's alleged Robert had told Gene he wanted this room because he wanted a room with a view. Gene would end up spending all his time in the turret room working on his art and conversing with Robert, even giving Robert a place at their dinner table. During this time, activity did not cease. Children in the neighborhood would report seeing Robert moving around upstairs, again moving from window to window. Those who visited the house could hear footsteps and the sound of pacing coming from upstairs and items being moved about. Many even reported the sounds of devilish giggling. Supposedly, Gene's wife, being greatly disturbed by the doll, would order him to be moved to the attic and Gene would oblige, but each time would find Robert had returned to the upstairs bedroom of his own volition. Annette would pass away in the early 1970s, with some claiming she died of insanity at the hands of Robert. Gene passed away in 1974, with some alleging he died holding his best friend Robert in his arms. In 1974, the artist's house was purchased by Myrtle Rhoda and reported that Robert had continued his activities, claiming herself that Robert would move about the house on his own, never appearing where she left him. The constant shifting of items and the sounds of laughing and footsteps echoing in empty rooms. Those who visited were naturally disturbed by Robert's expression, but each would report they'd witnessed these expressions change, as if the doll was listening to their conversations and responding accordingly, with his expressions taking a dark, almost angry turn when he heard people speak of Gene in an unfavorable manner. Some sources claimed that Robert attempted to kill the 10-year-old daughter of Myrtle, but I found little to corroborate this, unable to even confirm if Myrtle even had a daughter. In 1994, Myrtle Rhoda donated Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, where he still resides today, locked in a glass display case for all to come and see. Staff at the museum claim that Robert is still up to his tricks, moving and changing expression and causing things to go bump in the night. This has resulted in visitors being encouraged to speak to Robert in a polite manner and always ask for his permission before taking pictures, believing that if you show him politeness and respect, things will go smoother. Robert is still a popular attraction and even has a social media following. So what's the conclusion on the story of Robert? In my opinion, there are too many conflicting series of events for me to have anywhere near as much belief in them as with the case of the Annabelle doll. There is no doubt that Robert exists and is on display today at the Fort East Martello Museum. It's clear Robert is over 100 years old based on the manufacturing and kept in very good condition, and he was owned by Myrtle Rhoda after her purchase of the Otto estate. Everything else is debatable. First, people to this day are unable to verify who gave Eugene the doll. Was it a gift from his grandfather or someone in the employ of his family? It's alleged the Ottos abused their staff, but outside of rumor and gossip, there is no proof, and no proof other than stories of the paranormal events said to have occurred. Sources cannot agree on what age Eugene was when gifted the doll. Several sources say when he was 8 and in 1903, except in 1903 he was only 3 years old. Some sources say 8 years old, but in 1904. Others don't give an age, but vary from 1903, 1904, and 1906. Most sources don't even have the names of any other members in the Otto family. I obtained mine by finding his obituary. His obituary states he was the youngest of 4 siblings, yet no version of the story mentions siblings, which is odd. Sources cannot even agree on the name of Eugene's wife, though Annette and Anne are similar, but those same sources cannot accurately say how Eugene or his wife died. Many stories claim the doll was gifted by a maid who was an expert in voodoo. Of course, some say voodoo, some say black magic. And most sources cannot even agree on the maid's background, with some claiming her to be Jamaican and the others reporting her to be Bahamian. Many sites will even tell you that the maid fashioned the doll with human bones inside and human hair, except the museum that owns the doll have examined it and have actually been able to shed light on the fact this is actually an incomplete doll. What Robert is a turn-of-the-century mannequin that was intended to be on display as something like a clown or jester, and definitely no bones or human hair. I wonder if this maid even existed. Actually, I wonder if the doll ever belonged to Eugene at all. What if I told you everything I just said is not the true story behind Child's Play? In fact, the story you all know to be true is actually entirely false and no more than a rumor. Now, the history of the doll itself is indeed up for debate, with us really not being able to prove much of its history before 1994, but what we do know for certain is that Robert the doll has no connection to Child's Play or Chucky whatsoever. Screenwriter Don Mancini came up with the concept for Child's Play in the mid-80s while studying at the University of California as a film major. Growing up, his father worked in marketing and advertising, and so Mancini knew how the industry worked, especially when it came to marketing to children. He took inspiration from this and the popular Cabbage Patch Kids. On top of that, he was an avid horror fan and was well aware of the haunted doll trope, taking inspiration from things like the Living Doll episode of The Twilight Zone and Trilogy of Terror, and that is plain and simple where this story began. This was of course expanded upon given director Tom Holland took inspiration from the My Buddy dolls for Chucky's design, and producer David Kirshner, who produced all original 7 Child's Play films, having spoken out that he had wanted to make a film about a killer doll ever since he read The Dollhouse Murders. Written by Betty Wren Wright and published in 1987, it's the story of a teenager, Amy, and her mentally disabled sister, Luann, who find a haunted dollhouse in their aunt's attic that is an exact replica of the house itself. This was then adapted into a film in 1992. All the creative minds behind Child's Play have mentioned time and time again what their influences and inspirations were for the story, and not once did Robert the Doll get a mention. In fact, even author David Sloan, who wrote the book Robert the Doll, confirms while the stories have similarities, Child's Play didn't come from Robert. Now, no offense to David's work, but considering just how much of the story of Robert and even Eugene is unverifiable and questionable, I found myself wondering if in fact it was Robert who was inspired by Child's Play. In my research, I couldn't find any hard evidence that Robert was ever actually owned by the Otto family, let alone Robert Eugene Otto, but he was definitely owned by Myrtle Rhoda. Child's Play came out in 1988. Robert was donated to the museum in 1994. The doll arriving with this rich supposed history of paranormal phenomena, though nothing to back that up. Those who run the tours at the Winchester house have been reported they've been trained to embellish or flat out lie in order to sell the story and entertain visitors. In other words, make a profit. So who is to say we don't have a similar situation going on here? Is Robert actually haunted? He's real, sure, but is he supernatural? Or is this all an elaborate story? And is there a chance this story that so many of us have come to know and has ended up inspiring many films named after it in recent years, actually being a fake story inspired by a movie? No one can really say. But what we do know for certain, confirmed by the creators of Child's Play, is that Robert the Doll has nothing to do with the film's existence. If you look online, you will find article after article after article talking about the history of Robert the Doll, and many of them will mention that Robert the Doll was the inspiration for the character of Chucky and the overall story, Child's Play. If you look up articles on Child's Play, you're going to find the exact same thing, talking about here's the film Child's Play, and here's the real-life doll and story that inspired it. But the people who created it have never said such thing, and you will never find such an article or an interview where the creators of Child's Play say anything in relation to Robert the Doll. What it appears to have happened is someone has heard the story of Robert the Doll and thought that the story seemed very similar to that of Chucky in Child's Play, and took it upon themselves to say that Child's Play was inspired by Robert the Doll. And that's just not true. Now, one person has posted it, shared it, and then another person has taken that, told the same story, and used that as the source, but there is no real information to back any of this up. And then each person who has created a new article and based their resources on another article instead of actually looking at hard, cold facts, and then they all start changing details, where suddenly years start to change, ages start to change, or new pieces of information, such as a couple articles that will suddenly report that a 10-year-old girl was nearly killed at the hands of Robert the Doll, but that one is a rare one, and that one only pops up every so often. This is one of the rare times where Wikipedia even got something right. If you look at the Wikipedia page, you won't find anything on there that says that the film was inspired by Robert the Doll. If you go to the Robert the Doll Wikipedia page, even that won't tell you anything that it inspired Child's Play. You of course will find links below that will get you to similar topics about killer dolls or supernatural dolls, which eventually will lead you to Chucky. But it has nothing that says that Robert the Doll was the inspiration. So that, everybody, is the real story behind Chucky and Child's Play. The story that many of us have come to know or been told repeatedly is a true story. This supernatural haunted doll that inspired this iconic character Chucky, about a doll possessed by the soul of a serial killer, have absolutely nothing in common. This is nothing more than a rumor that can't be proved, can't be verified, and I don't understand why people believed it, other than they heard it enough times, they thought it was real, instead of actually listening to anything the creators of Child's Play had said. So this ends up being the first story behind episode where the real story is, there is no story. It was just a group of filmmakers making a film. Nothing more, nothing less. This was a very fascinating story to look at with a very interesting conclusion. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. I hope you have enjoyed this new information and this revelation that many people have thought about for years, but I don't think anyone ever actually took the time to actually check if it was true. And I'm sorry to tell you, it's not true. Robert the Doll exists, but Robert the Doll and Chucky, not related, not even cousins. So that is it for this latest episode of the Story Behind series. Please comment down below, share your thoughts on it. I'd love to hear from you, but that is it for this video. So be safe, take care, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. So until then, bye!